Welcome, everybody, to the first lecture of our semester. It's such a wonderful occasion to have Jürgen Mayer back to speak to us. He has taught here, so it's really very much like welcoming a friend back to the school for us. And I'm just going to mention a couple of things. Most of this would be known to you. He is a professor. He's taught in many schools. He comes from Germany, Stuttgart University, but later was at Cooper Union and Princeton. And really, he's taught all over the world. I'm not going to enumerate the places. He is also a winner of many important, very significant awards, including the Holcim Award, the Bronze in 2005, and a Mies van der Rohe Emerging Architect Award. He really has accomplished enormous things over what is really a very short period, most of it in the past 10 years. His most well-known work is the Metropole Parasol, and it stands out not only for its form, many of you know it, and the way, by the way, it's set in the city of Seville, but for its monumental use of wood. In fact, it's regarded to be the largest freestanding wooden structure in the world. And it's very rare to see wood behaving in the production of this kind of monumental and civic significance. But I would like to turn to something else that's been happening in his work, which I think might be even more didactic, more instructive, particularly in this context. And he might not like this, but it's something I think is important and I love about it. I would say really that whether he does or not, he has really been involved in a very intense investigation into a contemporary idiom. And I would say, in fact, it's a very personal and very specific idiom. First in the Parasol and other projects like that, he mastered the problem of the single surface kind of idiom, which many of you know about, a kind of non-orientable surface type of form. And he marked it in his own accent, his own handwriting, and it has something to do with the way he cuts into it. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But this foray into the complex curvature, into these single forms that are made of continuous surfaces, then gave way to the development of this idiom that is in his subsequent projects for buildings, as opposed to for, what I would say are follies and installations and such things. It's in the buildings that I dare say he has defined his own style. Now, they seem strangely familiar, and in some way, they could almost be what we would expect to see in the contemporary world. They seem somehow to fit in with the idea that we're living in the future. Amazing things could be made the way he's making them. I hate to make the reference, but it's useful. It's very clear. There is a way in which they evoke that period when we thought about things through certain kinds of references, like the Jetsons, cartoons. If that could no longer seem futuristic, it's here and now. And this gives his work this strange, old, new kind of quality, some kind of strange timelessness. And I keep asking myself why this seems to be the case. And I want to tell you what I think a little bit. I'm doing this more for him because I want to provoke him, too. It has something to do with the way he produces. Well, first of all, he doesn't use the multi-axial, curvature. He maintains architectural planarity, at least in one axis. There's a lot of flatness. And his 2D curves are not only graphic, he brazenly extrudes them. So first, he shamelessly turns them into graphics, and then he adds thickness, bringing them back to architecture. And the way he uses the curves is very unique and distinctive to him. They're usually fillets. All of you know about those, with a certain radius. But they're different in his work than anyone else's. We know the fillet is important. It has been a kind of one of the main tropes, of our time, frankly. I can name so many architects whose works have turned on this trope and who have developed it. But his way of doing it, as I said, is different. The reason I think the single curve, the continuous curve, the fillet is important, it has to do with providing us a model for unifying the inside and the outside. It gains a certain primacy with computer-generated form. That is, the surface, the idea of a single surface. It formalizes a movement through the building. It does many things for us. Turns space upside down. As I said, it produces this non-orientable kind of atectonic experience. But his don't really do this. You see, that's what's strange about it. His fillets, they are sometimes alluding to structure, although then they move back into a kind of graphic form. They flicker back and forth. This is one of the things they do. And often the buildings seem to have no particular reason whatsoever to be the shape they are. I mean, unlike those who do it, who try to diagram how you move through the building, what is going on inside the building, his intentionally produce an inscrutable condition in which you don't know why it is that way. This is very important and very different. He doesn't use it as a rhetorical operation to kind of give truth to anything. And then he uses it also to kind of produce single units of space and other things that give it a kind of primitive, very originary basis. I've been almost startled, even dismayed, even revulsed looking at some of his projects. And I found them so liberating for that reason, particularly in the last days studying them closely, and there's so many to look at. And that starts to permeate your understanding of architecture in a certain way. And so it disturbs me and excites me all at once, teetering on the edge. They go to very, very nearly dangerous places. And it has in fact provoked me to consider a new investigation on the question of signature. I might take that up now. And for these reasons, and for his buildings, and because he is such an engaging architect and teacher, I've been looking forward to the lecture tonight, and I'm very pleased to welcome Jürgen Mayer H.
Scott, thanks so much for your introduction. And maybe I have a little answer for you after I thank Moisen and also Ben for bringing me back to school. It's about 10 years now since I gave my last lecture here. So it's maybe 10 years of the happy side of production that I'm showing tonight. And it's true, a lot of things happened. And a lecture like this is always a good moment to look back and see what really happened and trying to analyze or find out what might have gone wrong, or what might have gone actually the right direction, and what is still there to discover. But to go back to the fillet, and I don't know if I understand you correctly, it's kind of the curve from one surface to the other. My little theory is that there's always something about reworking your childhood, and my childhood was in the 70s. And I remember kind of being very excited by the new architecture that happened then, which is the Chamfered Corner. It's basically one of the first moments when I think international style architecture became more of a sculpture and kind of a solid object rather than a tectonic composition. And the Chamfered Corner, which you see a lot in brutalist architecture in this kind of masses sitting in cities, can be seen something as a kind of a, let's say, fillet 101, like a very beginning of this kind of attitude of looking at the architecture as an object rather than as a product or as a project. And I think that's maybe the moment where my work and the work that we're doing in the office starts to rethink that moment of a continuous surface in a way, of an all-inclusive environment, of a moment where technology and the idea of future was kind of latent. I think our generation was also kind of taking away the idea of future. It was about anti-nuclear power movements. It was about the danger of like the Cold War that was hovering. It was actually about a negative idea of a future. And I think maybe somehow it's about regaining our future again, like a future that was kind of taken away from the generation that grew up or became kind of, adult in the 70s and early 80s. So maybe that helps a little bit to understand where the fillet comes from, and I still like it. You do too? Yeah, I know. So what you see here tonight is 10 years of production, as I said, and it's a lot about 2D to 3D. The graphic world is a really strong primordial soup in our work, and it happened, I think, with a discovery of something that you see here on the wall. And I explain to you a little bit later what this is. The work I'm showing tonight is somehow from 2D to 3D. It's from small to urban. It's from installation to nation. It's architecture as a catalyst about something that is to come. It's an option space in architecture for now, but also for future generations. We hope that beyond just the program that we are providing for the buildings we're doing, there's also potential for program to invent, users to invent, a kind of imagination of where this space could go beyond just the mundane program that we have to kind of provide. So this work comes from kind of a metaphor or maybe a very clear strategy that you see in the wall. It's data protection patterns. These patterns I discovered maybe around 1994 are patterns that you find on the inside of envelopes, on shipping slips, on PIN number envelopes that you get from your bank. It's a very strategic graphic that is doing something that kind of divides between an inside and an outside. It divides between a personal content and an exposed neutral content. It divides between something that's discrete versus something that's neutral. And these kind of negotiations between inside and outside, between before and behind or before and after, are important references in our work. It's a pre-text, and you see it in some of these patterns, that there are actually letters printed on top of each other. It's a writing before meaning, but it's a writing with a clear purpose. And the collection that I started to compile in the last almost 20 years now collect about 300 different patterns. They are numbers or letters. They're graphic compositions. There are moire effects and points. There are camouflage patterns, all found, nothing designed here. There are logos of companies. And as soon as you now see them, you will see them every day in your mail. Something very nice to collect because it comes for free to your home to you. And all of this somehow became a background, kind of a visual noise to be interpreted as something that really deals very much, or can be read as something that is maybe the last visible moment before everything moves into the invisible virtual world, where we deal about data handling, about information control. How is our culture, our moment now dealing with issues of private information and public exposure? So to move from small to big, I'll show you some examples how we kind of test the interpretation or the occupation of this very thin layer of inside and outside of this kind of protection or exposure moment in our world. This is an installation at the Berlinische Gallery in Berlin, which was a big space where we took one of the patterns and enlarged them, kind of really enveloping the space where you could actually occupy. It was very popular also with the pedagogical Children in Museum program, where they had to kind of try to find out what they see, and after they found out the numbers, they started to draw them and replay them. Then it became also furniture pieces, and at some point you also see these cubes. And these cubes are experimental structures where the rule is from one side, if you look straight, you'll see the original pattern. As soon as you turn around from an angle, you see a three-dimensional interpretation, a three-dimensional version of that. And then you zoom in and you get these kind of complex structures. And each of them is a different form of a 3D interpretation, from, let's say, extrusion to deformation to kind of shadow projections. But always, from one side, you had to read the original pattern. To go a step larger, this is an installation, actually an exhibition space for Autostadt Volkswagen in Wolfsburg. It's about an hour away from Berlin. That's where you would go to pick up your car. It's a whole themed land around the car and mobility. And we were invited to do a competition on mobility and sustainability, which is part of their main building when you enter the whole kind of Autostadt land. The idea of the sustainability issue was, I have to go back here one moment, is the triangular recycling arrows that you see all the way up in the left corner. This simple idea of recycling is long kind of taken over by a much more complex understanding, where dead-end roads in ideas of how we kind of consume or behave sustainable are replaced by a certain uncertainty. If biodiesel was the solution 3 years ago, half a year later, it was kind of considered to be kind of dangerous because it produces 4 times more carbon dioxide. And now this year, with all the missing rain, it even like threatens the idea of providing enough food for the people. So constantly we have to re-evaluate how we are considering this responsibility for a future generation. This kind of network of interdependencies, dead-end streets, became somehow a forest, a nature labyrinth, where all the different information points are embedded in this structure. And if you are very interested, you can zoom in very deep into the information. If you are more on a distraction, or let's say on a stroll through the whole Autostadt, then you also still get a feeling of what the possibilities and the issues of mobility and sustainability can be. They count about 2,000 to 3,000 people every day going through this exhibition. Here you have a virtual waterfall. When you touch it, it creates different letters and combinations of insights. This year, we got invited to extend this exhibition into in the same building, but on a lower floor, into a larger space that also brings this issue to kids from like 4 years to 12 years. And we extended this green world into kind of the stem, or let's say the roots for the mobility. And this is how we are working on this topic now. It's all indoors, and it becomes something that's playful, that deals with the motoric and sensorial aspects of children's and movement. And there are also, of course, then stands and materiality solutions that all deal with the same issue here. So it's a concept that actually gets more and more developed, and also the geometry gets more complex now. On a larger scale, and also in wood, and this is maybe the first wood building that we did, and became kind of the leading technology for some of our other projects. This is a dining hall in Karlsruhe, and it's a competition we won in 2004. It was built until 2007, very fast. It sits on the intersection of the city of Karlsruhe and the forest, which is the Hartwald. You see it's the little light area. Oh, I have a pointer here, up here. So it's somehow also let's say, maybe an ambivalent building between being a forest or an artificial forest and a real building as part of the campus of the university. This is the castle. You might all know this kind of ideal city planning of Karlsruhe. The idea was to create a space in the competition proposal that dealt with a very kind of flexible relationship between the footprint and the ceiling. And since the program was very tight for the space, we kept the relationship very elastic until we in the end had to freeze it at some point. This is then the building, and the problem was when we won the competition, we had to also confirm that it's buildable within the budget of a public building. The price was quite fixed. So the challenge was how to actually realize and materialize this building with a budget that was actually too little in a way. It forced us, and I hate to say this when there are maybe possible clients in the room, but in a way it helped us to become very innovative in the construction proposals. We developed different comparable structures: concrete, wood, timber, steel. In the end, it became a timber construction with a polyurethane coating. And what's actually interesting about this, it's very easy to prefabricate. You bring it on site, you spray on the 3mm coating. It still is diffusion open, so the humidity can actually vapor. The wood is very protected. And what becomes important, even more so in the Seville project that I'm showing at the end of the lecture, you also save a lot of wood because the 3 centimeters or 2 centimeters of weather protection that you have to do consider in wood construction also is replaced by this weather protecting layer. So there are a lot of aspects where this building in the end became a prototype for sustainable construction in Germany. And it caused also a lot of, let's say, strong criticism from German architects, because usually that's not what you do to wood. But it proved to be actually a very interesting solution. But at that time, like maybe 7, 8 years ago, this was not something to do. it also became quite successful now with the city of Karlsruhe. They rent the space for special events. It really kind of serves even more than what it's supposed to do. Like 8,800 meals a day is already kind of replaced by, I think, 2,700 now. And it really became the kind of student center, which we didn't really have until maybe 7 to 10 years ago in German universities, like a real kind of anchor point, a meeting point for all different faculties and students from different disciplines. So here you see the construction pictures, and it's a laminated wood, which is either like 1 centimeter thick layers or 1 millimeter thick. It depends on the kind of forces that are to be considered. And, oh, you see the fillets? And it's prefabricated, you bring it on site. It's actually sheets of 2 meter by 40 meters, and you can cut out any shape that you like. In this case, it was very kind of straightforward, put together. The insulation happens within the layer of the walls. And then you spray on the 3 millimeter coating, which is kind of a sealing of the whole building. What's nice about it, you don't need any extra metal flashing. You set in the windows and that's it. The water drainage, everything is kind of taken care of. So what happens when we design is usually we try to be quite, let's say, ignorant, maybe even naive when it comes to creating the spaces and the atmospheres that we like. But this kind of catches us as soon as we have to think about how to build it. And this forces us also, in combination with our engineers and also the companies, to find solutions and technical solutions that actually hold the image and hold the atmosphere that we wanted to achieve. And it's quite irritating sometimes for a lot of people when there's no metal flashing at the top, or if it's the same material that runs down the columns and also onto the surfaces where there's rain coming down. Quite often when we publish these things, the reaction is, oh, it's a nice rendering, but let's see how it looks when it's built. And I think it's exactly because these elements that are taken for granted are gone, and therefore there's a certain estrangement even in the detailing that seems to be puzzling. On a larger scale, and that's something that I'm showing also in the lectures, that it starts sometimes in small experiments and then grows, and also, of course, then transforms each time it gets applied. Here, it's a courthouse in Hasselt in Belgium, a competition also we won in 2005, and it's finished on the outside. It will be opened by the end of the year. It is on a master plan by West 8. Here is the train station of Hasselt. It's in Limburg in Belgium. This is the whole master plan area here. And the competition asks for the architecture of this urban master plan by West 8. So this is the first building to be built. There will be 2 high-rises, or 2 high buildings. The other one will be on this side. And the courthouse that we are now, that we were building or that we are finishing now, actually is a nice reference to the logo and the history of Hasselt. Hasselt comes from hazelnut trees, and the logo actually has 2 hazelnut trees. But it's also interesting that the courthouse, let's say, speaking justice, somehow happened in smaller villages in former times underneath the main tree in the center of the village. So the tree and speaking justice or making decisions in a community is very much related to each other. And so you can see that there's maybe a certain metaphor that works. Also, the city always has 2 high-rises from, periods. There are 2 Gothic churches, then there are 2 high-rises from the 20th century, and now there are 2 high buildings from the early 21st century. So there's also kind of a tradition. Here you see, again, 1 high-rise and the other one. This will not be built by us. 2 churches and 2 high-rises from the technical town hall from the 20th century. So here you see some of the echoes that we also explored in the dining hall. And next to the train station, you see this kind of very big scale jump, but it will not be the only building here, so you get also buildings along the train tracks to accompany it. This is the view from the other side of the train station. Again, here we have the timber, same timber. In this case, it's only the facade that's held up by the timber construction. It's also not covered with the polyurethane, since the outer layer, it has like different layers. The outer layer has just a whitewash to it. But it also will start to then, of course, weather in a different way. An office building in Hamburg, and I think you see certain ideas of also perforation and, let's say, penetration happening, a relief that happens here in this building, where a speculative office building maybe allows you only to play with the 50 centimeters of the facade. It's a very straightforward plan. It sits in Hamburg. This is the Außenalster. It's actually an inner city lake. And we have a beautiful view from the building onto a park in front of it and to the larger lake downtown. These windows, or these eyes that are actually winter gardens where you can walk into the facade and actually use them as kind of a place to read, to breathe, to get some fresh air, are happening in each rental unit. And then there's a park in front of it, which also is designed by us. It was a deal with the city where our client invested in the redesign of the park, which was kind of a rundown area, and therefore he was allowed to build a little bit more square footage here. The floor plan is a very open, flexible space, and these eyes, these moments where you can actually get into the facade, are happening where there are special moments for, let's say, a meeting room or a communal space, a lobby area. Here's a moment where you can do that. But also this kind of idea of, let's say, the relief and the texture goes into the structural moment. Here you have a precast concrete ceiling. You see it in separation walls, even all the way to the furniture and into the meeting rooms as well. Here in the end, you would look onto the lake of Hamburg. But when you're inside the building, you get the reflection of it also in the park. And if these are special raised areas where you can have a picnic at lunchtime, you get like these moments of rest, or like these special moments, kind of the same thing happening in the facade of the buildings where you have this program behind it. A villa near Stuttgart. This is a private home that, again, was difficult to come up with the concept because the client was so dedicated to the house that was there before. He started to build it in '84, and with every child and with more money, there was like a whole collection of materials. Actually, a really interesting catalog of what was going on in the last 25 years. So you got like marble floors and travertine floors and dark granite and light granite and everything. Outdoor pool became covered and became an indoor pool and extended into another indoor pool. A balcony became a winter garden in the room. So actually a really kind of interesting collection until even like a kind of a 90s minimalist edition was added as a garage. So he said, we really like this because it's kind of our home, but we don't really like as it looks anymore. So we developed this idea of family archaeology. We said, okay, we have to keep some of the concrete and the footprint of the old building, but let's take this geometry as an echo of how the building was actually growing over time and make this into the guiding principle. And similar to the dining hall that I showed earlier, where you had like a floor and the ceiling and the elastic space in between, here it's the ground floor and the upper floor rotated out from the ground floor, basically from the footprint, and that's how it happened. Do we have to focus? I don't know. Okay, so do I have to focus? Okay, so you have the house here. We are lucky because this is an industrial building and the site is still considered being an industrial site. If it would have been here, it would have been a housing site, so we would have to build a pitched roof. So we were kind of lucky. This is the River Neckar, and across from the river you would have Chipperfield's literature archive, which won a lot of prizes as well. So we are like in direct dialogue to each other. The house itself has the footprint of the old one, but then gets this kind of envelope again, this whitewash that takes the whole building and melts it. You have the lower level, which is the private level, and the upper level, which is the private level for the parents, in between the two kind of the more kind of public areas in a home. So here you have dining and library and reception and living room. This is the lower level and the upper level. And also, again, you have some, reappearing strategies when you design. It's a horizontal symmetry that happens here. So this distance is the same as this one. The window basically is the same, here flipped around. It runs through this whole thing as a kind of a horizontal line, a horizon line through the building. And then you get this white building, this white color that melts it all together. And when I mentioned before that this ignorance of how to build it kind of catches us, this was a serious one, where I think you have maybe 15 different detailings from the upper seal, like from the roof level all the way down here, where also the materials changes from a polyurethane coating to a stucco, in the end to a tartan rubber floor here at the bottom. And so basically all that happens behind that white color that you see. But it's necessary to actually keep that whiteness that holds it down, the blanket that holds it down on the ground. This is the plan where you have a lot of the existing walls still here, and the swimming pool and the children's rooms. The main floor has a central atrium with like 4 leaves, kind of 4-leaf wings with cores that separate the different areas. And then the upper floor, it's the private area again. And all the cantilevers basically happen through this rotation, and then every room, or let's say every area, had its own dynamic, where we had to go a little bit bigger or we had to retreat. But it's the result of this kind of really massaging the program coming from the original footprint of the house that happened there before. Some interior views. The main atrium looking up. This would be Chipperfields up here. The entries, the living room. I haven't been in there since they moved in, so this is a weekend before. We got some furniture to get a scale idea, but since then it's very private. And this is, again, the main view towards the valley with the horizontal symmetry line here. Another housing project we just finished in Berlin is an apartment building, and it's completely different in its scale, but also in its relationship to the city. Here it's in the very heart of Berlin. It is next to a Baroque building here. There will be another one at some point here. It is a building that takes the idea of landscape and nature from the hidden kind of block interior gardens into the facade, into the structure, into the actually more of the section of the building. You have the Friedrichstadtpalast here, the Tacheles area here. This was actually a big master plan by the new urbanists in the mid-90s. And this is the building here. Very typical in Berlin, you have a front house and your side wing. You see that also happening in a lot of these buildings. So quite often you have a very green, big courtyard or inner block. And we take this green nature idea or landscape idea into the building and take it all the way up and into the building. So we step up step by step with balconies and terraces, but we also have these living room sunken areas as kind of cozy sitting areas. And then it becomes even more, let's say, organic until we have this veil of the building that wraps the whole building. The back, again, is this courtyard, the 2 escalators and stairs, and these lounges that happen in every unit. And every apartment is completely different, also different in terms of the layout and where they are happening in the building. So it's quite complex in its interior organization. The idea of the facade actually came from the backside, where you have a problem maybe of looking from one apartment into the other one. And the idea of the lamellas helped us to create a certain privacy in a building that we wanted to be quite transparent and open. So you have these moments where things are hidden or covered, and so, of course, areas that are more exposed. So here you get kind of a diagram of the side facade where this idea of privacy and discretion is happening. But it became also then a topic for the whole building, where it became the railing, where it becomes kind of a shadowing device. But here you see how this protection, maybe there's a bedroom or even a toilet or a bathroom behind it. You have an all-glass facade with these elements taking certain moments of, let's say, privacy. This is then the inside of the court, just before it opened. Some of the sunken areas in the living room, and then the front facade, where this whole kind of lamella facade also swapped over. On a bigger scale, this is something we are working on right now. It's a competition we won for a living high-rise, an apartment high-rise in Düsseldorf. It's a building that has actually 6 floors of offices for, or practices for doctors and like small surgery units. And then all this here is a housing block. It's, if you know Düsseldorf, this is the Rhine Valley, this is the main city. And this is on the other side, this is here where there's actually a hospital and new development from Case Christian's Astok urban planners. The other building I'm showing you in a second is this one here, also a competition that we won. So this is the building here. We are now in the first phase of redesigning, or let's say design development. We won the competition in May, so it's still very fresh. All of this here is urban planning by Astok, and you see the Rhine Valley too, now it's here in the front. The building is quite complex, but we have some echoes, let's say, of this kind of softness that envelopes you, that kind of hugs you when you live in there. And the different apartments that we are working on right now create a certain kind of combinatoric and puzzle within the building above the doctor's offices down here. So it's very early, but I want to show you how certain ideas move step by step from like one scale to another, also in terms of the materiality. In this case, it will be a fiber cement element that we're working on right now. Again, a completely different for, let's say, materiality of sensorial experiences. And ideas how to deal with wind issues, of course, protection, not only from views, but also from the certain climates, still keeping a certain transparency. But what is important that you also have a couple of, let's say, communal facilities. In this case, the terraces are important also as shadows, like noise shadows from this main busy street here. And you have a communal terrace with a view back onto Düsseldorf. That's what you see here. And this is the other competition we won half a year earlier, which is also a high-rise. And what's exciting with this one here, it takes a little longer because the whole zoning plan still has to be kind of approved and go through the whole administrational process. It's a high-rise that's on a 5-degree angle. You see a little bit of a comparison with other angled high-rises. Ours is working along the 5-degree angle here. It's a whole block. It's actually a ring next again to the train station. That's something that you see, I think, happening all over the world, where inner city industrial, or say cargo areas will be transformed into lively parts of the city. Here it's a hotel in the front. It's a mixed use complex. It's sports facilities, it's offices, shops, and it looks like it's going to be bought by a Japanese investor. Düsseldorf has a big Japanese community, and it might become kind of a Japanese trade center. So you have this whole kind of ring of a building, but this is the high-rise part. You have basically a front step going up and this court or like little plaza in front of the high-rise. Important for Düsseldorf is the dance theater, which is here, and the train station here. So this becomes now a new kind of boulevard that brings people from the train station to this cultural institution here. So things get bigger and bigger. Maybe the biggest project we worked on so far is Georgia. Georgia is a country that is extremely lively in its transformation. And we got a call about 3.5 years ago from the government for a possible project. That one did never happen, but a certain kind of discussion, exchange did start. And step by step, we did a lot of mostly very small projects, but it became kind of an acupuncturing of Georgia. And all the spots that you see here are possible sites or already existing sites where we did projects. The first one happened without us knowing it. So it was a little bit of a bumpy start. This is a proposal we did, actually was one of 4 for a cafe sculpture, public sculpture in Tbilisi. And we never really heard from them back from them. And then at some point I got a call for maybe a possible other project. And while they talked to me, they said, and then you can come to the opening of this cafe. And I said, well, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, we built this cafe that you sent us. Basically, the renderings. They send us, we send them the renderings, actually 5 different renderings from 5 different designs. So I said, well, that's a little interesting. Since you want to become a Western country, there are certain copyright issues to consider. Okay, let me get back to you. So actually it was built without us knowing it. And even further, somebody liked it so much that they built a new facade next to the building. So the president, when I met the president the next time, he said, well, it's like a fake Rolex. It's kind of an honor, isn't it? And I said, yeah, that's the way how you can look at it. So from then on, things went very smoothly. We were asked to redesign a proposal for the new checkpoint between Georgia and Turkey, which is here. So Georgia ends here, this is Turkey. Maybe one of the most beautiful sites we ever were asked to design something. And you see here a building that is not so much a division between two countries, but it's mostly a meeting point, or it's considered to be a place where you can actually rent spaces, where you can, of course, go and shop, but you can also use it as a conference center. And what happens, it's really on the waterfront that people are also using it as a beach. And the beach happened to be there before. So it's a really kind of lively space. It is, as much as it is, of course, a marker between the two countries, also something that opens up the relationship between the two countries. They're working on a much more fluent transition. Now you can just go with your passport and you don't need a visa anymore, actually you can go with your ID card. You don't even need a visa anymore as a Turkish Georgian citizen. So it's fascinating to see that somebody or a country considers their border stations as something for architecture and also something that has kind of a positive, different idea. I mean, Georgia is mostly also a transit country. There's hardly any, oil or anything else. It's a country with agriculture, but also it's an important transit country from Azerbaijan to the Black Sea in Europe or to Turkey. So transit architecture or architecture that you see along going through the country is really something that's important. That's the way how you see and experience Georgia. So here are some of the impressions. You see the terraces, even the tower, of course, there's kind of an overlook, but also the terraces, you can go up and overlook the station, overlook the sea. You have the conference rooms actually on the roof above the checkpoints with a view onto the Black Sea. It's a real welcome sign to the country, or even like a goodbye, of course, as well. The other infrastructure is up here, and this was maybe the fastest project we ever built. 3 months from the first call to the realization of this airport. It's this building here, this is the runway. I got called in August, I still remember August 25th, 2 years ago, and was opened on December 20th. It's a very small airport. It's 280 square meters. It is in a super small town called Mestia, which is up here, a UNESCO heritage site with all these old wooden towers. It's a site, a city, or kind of a region that also is kind of developed into a tourist dedication for hiking, for skiing, and so forth. And it's a really beautiful, kind of still very kind of intact city in Stavanica, which is in the Caucasus, in the high mountains of Caucasus. You have a Canadian airline that actually operates between Tbilisi and Mestia, but you can also fly from there to Batumi and actually swim in the lake, swim in the Black Sea, and then go up and ski. So it's very much about these different kind of landscapes that Georgia is offering on a very small territory, actually. There are also 2 more buildings in that city. It's the little town hall here, where you can also go and have a wedding, and the police station. And I'm still very impressed, even now that I look back, they are finished now maybe for about 12 months or so, or 10 months, that, somebody really takes care of like how a police station looks like. It's the idea of making the country into a contemporary country. The police supposedly, I don't want to be kind of the ambassador of Georgia, I'm not in that role, but it's incredible to see how much it changed and how much support it has with the young generation. Our period is gonna come to an end soon, I'm sure, but it was, or still is, a really interesting way to see how the city or the whole country actually changes. We built 2 rest stops along the highway that they're building now. They didn't have a highway so far. It's in Gori, the hometown of Stalin, and they're building, in the end, 20 of these rest stops along the highway. This is also an interesting strategy where these rest stops are sometimes built in areas where there is no highway yet, but they bring in infrastructure like a supermarket, a cultural space to also expose or show arts and crafts from the region. They bring basically an idea of the future to areas where there's still very kind of, not medieval, but very kind of old-fashioned lifestyle. And here you have some of these buildings, two stations already opened last November. And in this one, they already had like 2 or 3 requests, I don't know if that really happened or not, to have their marriage wedding celebrations in the rest stop. So a kind of strange story, or I guess kind of an honoring comment that you get from like the normal people who really are using these buildings in the end. In Tbilisi, we are working on a big villa, also a little bit obscure because I only met the client once for maybe 15 minutes. It also happens through like agents and other people. It's the building next to the President's Palace here. It is a villa that sits basically on top of this rock ridge overlooking the city. And I think we are, and I'm saying this, I think we are up here now with the construction. We only get once every maybe 2 or 3 months some pictures from the construction site. So it's a different way of working. Sometimes you're very much involved. They want a lot, from you. It also depends, of course, on the client. Sometimes you really have to fight for being involved. But compared to how sometimes little we are involved, the outcome is surprisingly good. So you never really know. It's a real adventure to build there. And this is like old images here. It's a screen, of course, that you project a lot on at this point. And the last project I'm showing you from Georgia is in Lasica. Lasica will be a new town for 500,000 people. It's a plan to build a city here. I think they just started to lay out the streets. I was there once where there was basically nothing yet. And one of the first signs for this new city is a marker. It's a sculpture in the Black Sea, a kind of 35-meter high sculpture on a pier that actually will become kind of, a point to go out, look back at the city along the water beach boulevard. And so here we are making some proposals and renderings. You already see the preparation work for the pier. It's a little further than this. I think the opening will be end of October, so there's a tight schedule for that one. It is made in steel, shipped from Turkey with boats to Lasica. And here are some wireframe images and renderings of the piece. Here again, you see some echo of what happened earlier in Metropole Parasol. Do I have some time left? Yeah? Okay, good. So this is Metropole Parasol, and I'm showing this now in more depth. It's, I think, our most complex project, and also guided us in the last 8 years, from winning the competition in 2004 to opening it last year, and now seeing how it gets appropriated, how it gets used, how it starts to age, how it starts to be modified since it's part of the everyday life of Seville. The piece, Metropole Parasol, really sits in the very center of the old medieval downtown of Seville. And here you see it with the red spot as the major kind of square. It was the site for the market before. I think I have an image in a sec. This is how it sits in the very dense urban fabric of Seville. It's supposedly the largest medieval downtown in Europe. You have other big institutions like the cathedral with the Giralda Tower, the other high point to look down onto the city. You have the town hall with the square. You have the bullfight ring up here. There's the waterfront. Over here you would have the expo site from 1992. It was never really a plaza. It was always an institution. There was a cloister before. It became bigger. They ripped down more medieval fabric. They built a bigger cloister. At some point, that was taken down to build a food market, like the main market, which was existing till the 70s, basically, and then they had to move it outside of the city center because the city grew too large in the 20th century, and they had to basically make a larger structure outside of the city. So here you have the very center of the city where the major roads or the passages through the downtown all go through Plaza de la Encarnación. And so we bring back basically an institution, a building, an object that occupies that space. It's also not a square like at Plaza Mayores or Plaza Reals where you have the same facade enveloping or wrapping around the plaza and creating this unified frame. Here it's a very nervous, like small buildings, high buildings, because small buildings all of a sudden became, or alley buildings became all of a sudden facades to a plaza. So it's a different process how this open space was created inside the center of Seville. This was also the site or the condition when the competition was launched in 2004. The city wanted to build a parking garage underground, and when they started digging out the earth, after 6 meters, they found all these Roman ruins and mosaics, and that's when everything stopped. And the city used that moment to reflect what is actually public space in the 21st century. How can we protect this window into the history of Seville, but also bring back program and function that actually become part of everyday life of Sevilla. You see another plaza here with big trees. This was a big reference point for us. The plaza itself was divided into two parts. The market, which was the whole site, was taken down in the southern part in the 50s to create this endpoint of buses. You see them turning around here. The northern part was taken down in the 70s. It was very run down, so actually it was also dangerous to be in there. It would fall apart at any moment. So the city really had to reinvent what was happening there. Maybe today you would save them and actually try to keep that structure up. In the 70s, it was a different idea of the car and the city and modernity, of course. This is how it looked. It was more like a framed, or let's say a walled-in market. And then it was a temporary situation for about 30 years with this parking spot. When we were starting to think about the competition, we thought about shadow, or let's say creating a climate that makes us possible to actually be outside in hot summer months or most of the year was the guiding rule. So we start actually with different shapes of a roof, a big shadow device that would actually protect us from direct sunlight. And we did a couple of studies of different geometries and formations, but we always came back to this form that you see now because it looked the most kind of relaxed or the most kind of like natural to us on that site. We of course we worked with all kinds of media, with like study models and computer renderings and kind of animations to see how actually to test it on different scales. In the end, it became this kind of undulated roof that is a double roof here with a restaurant inside and a panoramic view on top. Then we had to collect the forces because there was only very selected areas where we can go into the archaeology with our loads. So this is how it actually comes down. But from the other side up, you have the archaeology as a museum for the history of Seville. You have on the ground floor food market and also some commercial areas. You have the elevated roof for the market as another elevated plaza, and then the Metropole Parasol roof structure. The plaza itself has some irregularities, and each kind of pocket has a different subclimate of its kind of neighborhood and how they use the space. Even the elevated plaza has a different kind of feeling. So it's possible to activate or to program the plaza with different kinds of moments and different kinds of activities and times of occupation during one day, or even like in the cycle of maybe a week or so. Some plans, I don't think I should go too deep into them. We have the archaeology here with like some selected points where we can go in with the loads. This is the ground floor with a passage running through to connect actually the southern path, pedestrian street all the way through the building into the northern part. The building actually came with hopes on 3 scales. On a very local level, to bridge the development of the southern part of the downtown into the northern part, which was at that point still kind of not dangerous, but a little shady. Then, of course, on a national level to compete with other cities who went through kind of a innovation moment, and also showed they're being part of the 20th century or 21st century, like Seville, Barcelona or Tenerife or Valencia. And then on an international level to, of course, attract more tourism, but also to attract a certain kind of industry and innovation economy. The structure is about 150 meters long, 35 meters high, like 6 stories high. And what you see here in the section is what's kind of dark is concrete or steel. What's light beige is a timber construction with a polyurethane coating. And this is when our kind of prototype with the dining hall came back. We had to compare the structure, since we didn't think of a material when we designed it really, how to build it. And we compared steel, again, with glass fiber reinforced concrete, with wooden timber layer with protection, with polyurethane coating, or without. And in like 3 processes, with the city, with the contractor, and also with the construction company, always the timber construction with the polyurethane coating came back as the solution when you compare cost development, prefabrication quality, speed of construction, noise control, wind noise behavior, earthquake behavior, expansion contraction when you have hot days, cool nights, and so forth. So it's a process that it's actually not guided by any, say, taste or favored issue, but actually a very clear kind of catalog of categories that you have to consider. And then step by step, we also use the same company from Munich, Finforest Merck, to develop this project further and build it. And here you see some of the wood process panels, construction pictures. This is, if let's say the building maybe is the largest timber construction in the world, and I think it is, that's what we were told, the real innovation at this point actually happened in the joints. It kind of doesn't look like it, but it actually is now, again, we were told, the largest building that is glued together. It's bonding technology that actually saved us and actually provided us a possibility to build this thing. The forces from one piece to the other were so strong that the wood would actually melt away if you would bring the loads only in a very small surface into the wood. So we had to actually bring the loads very deep into the timber to distribute it more equally. But the forces is not brought in by screwing the metal rods into the wood, but actually by gluing them in. And this is a glue that was developed by the Fraunhofer Institute in the last couple of years, on the market now maybe for 4 years. And here you see how it's actually made. This is the steel rod that takes the load into the wood. This is the glue, and then you have the layers of the timber with the polyurethane coating. And this was the only way actually we could do it. There was one challenge because we didn't know if the glue actually also survives when it gets really hot. But we had to do some tests, and it showed that only the first 4 centimeters were critical with the heat development from the metal detail into the wood. The rest was tempered enough with the wooden material around it. But there was kind of a safety issue, so we tempered the whole structural pieces. When you already put in the concrete, the steel details into the timber plates, you would actually bring the whole thing into a temperature chamber, heat it up to 80 degrees, and then also the performance temperature of the glue goes up 10 degrees to 80 degrees. So you can do that one time, and I think now we are kind of safe for the next 100 years of climate change. We'll see if that happens. So some images from the construction site. You see the 2 concrete cores for the elevators that had to happen in concrete because of earthquake. You see the substructure, the scaffolding to hold up the pieces. So even that is somehow like a very old-fashioned way to build it. And I think the quality of the project in the end comes from the dialogue between the Metropol Parasol and the old architecture of Seville. I think in that combination, it really becomes kind of a seductive proposal for the city. You see some images, impressions just after it was finished. Shadow, of course, is an issue. You have, more or less noon at this point, but you get also different shadow imprints and shadow images, projections in the course of a day and even in the year. When you look at it from the sky, this is a Bing map, it's hardly visible. You only see basically the passages on the roof and the restaurant. But of course, when you're underneath it, it has a certain quality of identification for the city. There was a lot of criticism, of course, from an older generation, or let's say more of a middle-aged generation, who couldn't really see. The older people were very supportive because they were happy to see something happening. The younger people felt something happens, there's a future that comes up, because the city really wasn't really going anywhere in the last 10 years before they started with this competition. And in the realization process, the voices became less and less kind of dominant who were fighting against it. And it's quite interesting to see how the everyday use even convinced very harsh critics to a moment where they seem to appropriate even for their uses, and I'll show you an image in a second. But this is now some impressions. When you're up there, you overlook the city. It's the other moment where you have a chance to actually look at the roofscape of this kind of secret hidden city of Seville. You overlook, and you always have the contrast between the, let's say, the contemporaneous of the building with the old city. But what happens is this appropriation that I showed you, and of course the Catholic processions that happen every year, the week before Easter, were one of the most critical moments to convince the critics from those kind of activist groups. But it happened that this year they even put it onto their on the cover of their leaflet of the program of Semana Santa. So it couldn't be so bad anymore, I think. Also, when you have these processions and they're very silent somehow, you only hear the music, this old kind of traditional music, people breathing who have to carry these really heavy loads, and then, you know, all the citizens and of course tourists visiting and watching. You have moments where, you know, it actually needs to be managed and programmed, and then there's like stuff going on that also changes over the year. But it also happened to be kind of the stage for 4 different kinds of music videos. This is very cheesy Spanish flamenco. This is a rapper, hip hop. You have it, again, very cheesy. And then there was public viewing for the Euro Games. And this was actually quite, you know, nice to see how it really packs all these people into the plaza. It was an action thriller, like a shooting scene on the plaza. This was a movie. And it was also it was a site for the gay pride on the left side, and the cartoon festival they had on the right side. And it was also, of course, the site for the Indignados de Revolución that happened last year, with a lot of demonstrations, sit-ins, discussions about the future of the country and the future of the youth. This was maybe the first moment where there were so many people gathering and using that image, that building also as a sign for a vision of the future. And people also slept there, so in a way it became a new living room for the city, a new gathering place. And I think there's no better gift that a citizen, that the city can give to its people and to its citizens, to really welcome them and envelope them where they can meet and actually celebrate community in all different kinds of forms of communal experiences. And this is also how I would like to end the lecture. It kind of wraps the lecture by showing you some of the patterns again, and you see it all might come back or not to an original idea. Thank you very much. I think I can avoid it, right? My voice is disappearing slowly, but maybe it's in. Yep. I hear you.
Can you talk a little bit more about the translation of the detailing between? Thank you. Hi. So can you talk a little bit more about the translation of the detailing in the last project, the Parasol project, between the mock-ups of the like the chipboard models or the little wood models, and the transformation of that detail into the actual detailing of the full-size piece, and what prompted the decisions, and at what point did you have to decide that the detailing had to really significantly be changed or investigated?
Yeah, this was the most complicated process besides the political process, of course, of the project. We had Arab engineers on board, and we had the Finforest Merck company on board. They also had another engineer on board. So it was a very complex decision-making process. It looked very simple in the beginning, this kind of orthogonal grid and this amorph, outline. It was helpful to make the adjustments when we had to talk to the landmark department. They said like, oh, here it's too high, there it's too low, you should actually go. So actually, to make these elastic moves was quite easy with this structure. In the beginning, the design actually was building the outline as a shell and would be hollow in the inside. This would have been much more difficult to do the adjustment. So this was actually a very helpful move to keep it massaged or keep it elastic enough to be massaged from all sides of, let's say, landmark heritage people to structural issues to maybe programmatic issues where we wanted more space or we needed more, volume for the restaurant area. The idea of using the wood with the polyurethane coating came very early because we saved a lot of material. I mentioned before that the 2 centimeters that you need in wood for weather protection, you could actually take this off, so there was less wood and less weight in that case. The problem was we had to build the foundations for the parasol stems very early, before we actually knew exactly what was happening up there. There was, and I don't know if this is true or if this was a political argument, there was a warranty that ran out with the temporary anchors of the concrete walls for the basement, for the parking garage, until they would have been kind of stiffened out by the floor plates of the garage. Since they never came, and the anchors were kind of losing their warranty time, the city was afraid that the walls would actually move and the buildings next to it would also start to crack. If this was an argument to start very fast with the construction, or if this was real true, I don't know. But basically, we had to build the foundations very early on, assuming some load up there. So we were limited how much we actually can put on top of these things at some point. So we had to be quite lightweight or within the limits that were given. So reducing the wood dimensions and the wood load was important. And then it was actually an ongoing process, and I cannot tell you at what point it really happened between Arab and the construction company to go back and forth how to solve the problem of the detail and the forces. And the moment when they found the glue, this was actually the breakthrough. But there were like endless discussions which I couldn't follow anymore because they talked about micro 0.5, omega factors, that would be like a drama for the building. I didn't follow, but it was serious, I understood. So in the end, the glue and the bonding technology was the saving moment. This is only actually from, the stems are put together by nails, but the moment there's like a kind of a cut where it cantilevers, and it's all in the cantilevering part up there.
So no, I just was saying that there is a moment that there is actually, I think that there is a separation between the actual geometry of the grid and the actual shape of the piece. And I think that the signature of that separation is that little piece that is kind of like
the surfboard. Yeah, you have this in some moments, and I think that's when you actually see that it's a digital process or a computation process to come up with the shape. It's this invisible form of a, let's say, endless orthogonal grid, which is a south, north, east, west grid that happens. So only within this invisible line, that creates the form, basically, that divides between inside and outside. Inside, it's materialized. Outside, it's still invisible. And so basically, it was elastic, as I said before, and at some point, you get these little things that you wouldn't design if you would design it by hand. So it's exactly that conflict between the, let's say, organic outline and the orthogonal grid.
Hi, I've actually had the pleasure of going through the custom building at the border. I was kind of taken aback. I was like, oh, that's that project. It here's my passport. And in particular to Georgia, and linking it back to that early project you showed with the numbers superimposed on each other, that installation, the thing that strikes me about Georgia that you didn't really address is their font, particular to their language. And I'm wondering if you could speak to if there is any connection between how successful you are in Georgia and the affinity of your, I'd say, your signature to their signature.
But the font is like the way how the writing is really amazing. Yeah. We have actually a Georgian graphic designer who develops Latin writing, with the Georgian feel, and it says Georgia on the tower, but they didn't like it. I mean, we convinced the government to do it, and they finally did it, but it's now taken down. They want to replace it with like a normal, like more Latin writing, which is surprising to me because I think it has actually a nice kind of echo with the design and typography of or the types of the Georgian language. I think there's a certain, let's say, maybe pleasure of a sculptural understanding of space and shapes and forms and kind of culture, and maybe that's why our work echoes so well with the culture there. But it's only something I can assume. I don't know. And how was it going through the checkpoint?
Well, the Turkish one is, I mean, there's two buildings. The Turkish one is just like horrible, and you get yours, and you thought this is incredible. It's two different worlds.
Yeah, I couldn't go to the opening, unfortunately, but this would be like an opening with two presidents in one building, so yeah, I couldn't go. There's a micro.
Hello? Okay. So you started the lecture by showing us the backup, the envelopes where there are these patterns which are infinitely extendable. To me, I suppose I'm not sure whether I'm right, but it sounds like because they're infinitely extendable, they're contactless or they transcend context. And just going through some of your project, I feel like some of the projects where you've taken one idea and used it in numerous different situations. So does that also speak about your attitude towards context, the fact that you feel architecture can be contextless or it can actually transcend context?
I think both is happening. The pattern is somehow a filter how to look at the world or how to look at certain operations in our world. Then, of course, when you look at the site, there are some things that might, jump into your face, like, that actually makes you curious about the location and about the site. And I think it's that selection of what I think is worth exploring and overemphasizing and like putting to the foreground, and therefore also creating a different kind of perception of the context around it. By introducing something like, let's say, maybe the dining hall, if I go back to that, with the ambivalence between the forest and the city, a building that actually works exactly at this transition, you also start to read the context in a different way. So, of course, there's, let's say, maybe the tools or the way how we design from this pattern background, but of course it gets applied and transformed by these local conditions. So I think it's actually both. It's a local selection of investigations and an adaptation of basically your package that you bring to the site.
As a follow-up question to that, I'm wondering how the form of the Metropole project responds to the context, because it seems like could you have changed the bulbous forms of that canopy substantially without achieving the same thing? Like, how much is that?
Which project are you talking about?
The agenda, the project in Seville. Mm-hmm. Seville.
Well, the cantilever happened because we wanted to create as much shade as possible, and then we had to bring down the loads on very selected points. So that's how kind of the stems developed. But there was also a certain, let's say, airiness about the project we thought were important. So the cantilever, although every building, is better with a cantilever, basically. If you do a bad design, a cantilever saves everything. It made sense, as a big roof shadowing device on that location. But again, going back to, of course, sorry, if you give a lecture, you try to kind of make sense and like package everything nicely. It's more of an intuitive process at the same time, even going back to your question. At some point you have, let's say, a word that you usually shouldn't use in an architecture school, a feeling about intuition, that it's right, or it actually creates a certain tension that is a productive tension for the site. You can develop a kind of a methodology and certain processes, and you know that you have the tools and to develop a design, but at some point you have to, let's say, make a decision what is right and what is wrong, or what feels kind of the right direction. And that's something that cannot be kind of rationalized. It's something that you have to decide. Yep. There's one more. Okay, last question.
Thank you for the lecture. You began with the envelope, and you ended with the envelope, and your lecture was enveloped. And you used all these metaphors of sort of embrace and hugging and the blanket.
Maybe we had the last lecture question before that.
It was very cuddly. But yeah, you don't really, it's not something that we really say that much in reviews or pinups, or when we're talking about our work, we're sort of substantiating it on different bases. Do you think this is something that you learned in practice, or this sort of compassionate approach? Would you describe yourself as such?
In German, there's a word called begreifen, which is kind of touching, grasping, which is a lot about, I think, the kind of the bodily experiences and the understanding, the intellectual understanding. And I think that kind of maybe sums up what we are trying to do in our work. Thank you.